Picture the largest animal you have ever stood next to. A horse? A car? Maybe, once, a whale washed up on a beach. Now imagine looking up at something 3 times larger, and realizing it is looking back. The ocean has always grown things too big for us to believe. Most are gone now, crushed into rock, their true size hidden inside single fossil bones we can barely lift. But when you rebuild them, the numbers stop making sense. Today we are measuring 6 prehistoric sea monsters against the animals alive right now, and every single one of them wins. Here is the strange part about size in the deep past. On land, a giant leaves a giant skeleton, and you can lay the whole thing out and see it. The sea rarely gives you that. It gives you one vertebra the size of a dinner plate, or a single tooth, or a jaw with no skull attached, and then it asks you to imagine the rest. So for most of these animals, nobody realized what they were holding at first. They thought they had a big fish, or an odd whale, or a boulder with a pattern in it. The horror comes later, in the lab, with a tape measure, when the scale finally lands. We are going to start with something almost gentle, and end with a hunter that grew to the size of a whale. Every one of them was real, and every one of them is bigger than the animal you would compare it to today. So keep a living creature in mind for each one. A turtle you have seen, a crocodile on a nature program, a shark from the news. Because that is the only honest way to feel a number this large. A measurement means nothing until it is standing next to something you already know. We begin in the Badlands of South Dakota in 1992, where the ground is nothing but grey shale, the dried mud of a sea that once split North America down the middle 70 million years ago. A fossil hunter working that shale uncovered a shape that did not belong to any turtle anyone recognized. It was a turtle. It was just the wrong size. Head to tail, the animal measured about 4.5 meters. From the tip of one front flipper to the other, it spanned 4 meters. In life, it would have weighed as much as a small rhinoceros, somewhere north of 2 tons. They named her Brigitte, and today she sits, fully assembled, in a museum in Vienna. Her kind is called Archelon, and it remains the largest turtle science has ever confirmed. To understand that number, think of the biggest turtle alive today, the leatherback, gliding through the open ocean at around 2 meters long. Already an animal that stops divers cold. Archelon was more than double that. It was, quite simply, a sea turtle the size of a car. It did not even have a solid shell to explain the size. Instead of the hard dome you picture on a turtle, its back was a framework of bony struts under leathery skin, a lighter build for an animal that lived its whole life out in open water. It had a sharp, hooked beak and jaws strong enough to crush shellfish and slice through jellyfish and squid. Archelon was first named back in 1896 from earlier scraps pulled out of these same plains, but it took a skeleton like Brigitte's to show how far the design could be pushed. Its front flippers, spread wide, were broader than a family car is long, driving a body that most likely spent its entire life out at sea, hauling onto ancient beaches only to lay eggs, the way a leatherback does. It grew slowly, over decades, to reach that size. There was no violence in how this one died. It aged, it sank, and the still, oxygen-starved mud of the seafloor closed over it slowly enough to keep the whole animal together. That is the last calm entry on this list, because a turtle, however enormous, is built to drift. The next thing, sharing that water, was built to kill, and it was longer than the room you are sitting in. For that one we go back further, to the end of the 1700s, and into a chalk mine beneath the town of Maastricht in the Netherlands. Quarrymen cutting stone underground broke into something dark, set in the pale rock. What they chiseled free was a jaw. A single jaw, longer than a grown man, is tall, lined with teeth like curved daggers. Nobody knew what it was. Some said crocodile, some said whale, and the skull became so famous that when a French army marched into the town years later, seizing it was written into their orders as a prize of war. It took the great anatomist Georges Cuvier in 1808 to look at that jaw and say the thing science was not ready to hear. This animal is gone. It belongs to no living creature. It is extinct. That skull became one of the first hard proofs that entire kinds of life can vanish from the earth. The animal was Mosasaurus, and it was not a dinosaur. It was a marine lizard, close akin to the monitor lizards and snakes crawling around today. The largest individuals are estimated at roughly 12 meters, and the biggest jaw fragments hint at animals pushing towards 17 or 18. Set that against the largest reptile alive now, the saltwater crocodile, which tops out near 6 or 7 meters and can already drag a buffalo under. Mosasaurus was double its length, powered by a long finned tail that drove it forward in bursts, and it carried a horror the crocodile does not. Set into the roof of its mouth was a second row of teeth, angled backward, so that anything it seized could only travel one direction, down its throat, whole. We know it fed on ammonites, sea turtles, fish, and even smaller mosasaurs. The drowned Cretaceous world was full of its meals. It hunted with the flat, patient eyes of an ambush killer, then took its prey down in a single swallow, whole. It ruled its sea in the last stretch of the age of reptiles, and then it died with the dinosaurs when the asteroid struck. But it was still, recognizably, a predator with a predator's build. The next giant had no teeth at all, and it was bigger. That one came out of the clay of Victorian England, and it nearly broke the people who found it. In the 1880s, a collector named Alfred Leeds began pulling bones from the Oxford clay. Bones that made no sense. They were plainly parts of a fish, but the scale was absurd, they came out in scattered fragments, and the internal structure was so spongy and strange that early workers could not even agree what part of the body they were looking at. The confusion was so total that when the animal was finally named, they built the confusion into the name itself, Problematicus, the problem fish. One early attempt to make sense of the bones guessed they came from a plated, land-walking reptile. That is how far the true scale sat from anything anyone had ever handled. For the next 100 years, its size was a running argument. Some estimates ran to 30 meters, longer than any whale, before careful modern study reeled the number back to about 16.5 meters, which still makes Leedsichthys the largest bony fish that has ever lived, longer than a city bus and heavier than a truck. And here is the turn. This colossus had no teeth. It was a filter feeder. It cruised the Jurassic Sea 165 million years ago with its mouth held open, water pouring in and out through its gills, thousands of fine, comb-like rakes straining tiny drifting animals out of the flow. The same quiet way a whale shark feeds today. The growth rings in its bones suggest it kept getting larger for 20, 30, perhaps 40 years, and may not have stopped even when it died. Its gills held thousands of these fine rakes, an enormous living sieve dragged endlessly through clouds of plankton. It took decades to grow that big, feeding on things too small to see, while pliosaurs that could have bitten a car in half patrolled the same water. It survived by being too large to be worth attacking. A gentle giant, in the most literal sense. But gentleness is not where this list is going. The next animal was a hunter, and its teeth were longer than your forearm. In November of 2008, in the coastal desert of southern Peru, near the town of Ica, a team walking the eroded badlands of the Pisco Formation almost missed it. On one of the last days of the field season, a researcher spotted teeth weathering out of a slope, and then the skull they belonged to, nearly 3 meters long. Set into it were teeth measuring more than 36 centimeters, as long as your forearm from elbow to fingertips, the largest biting teeth of any animal ever found, tusks aside. They named it Livyatan, the old Hebrew word for Leviathan, and gave it the species name Melville, after the man who wrote Moby Dick. This was a sperm whale, but not the sperm whale, you know. Modern sperm whales are the largest toothed animals alive, reaching around 16 meters, yet they carry working teeth only in the lower jaw, and they use them on soft, boneless squid in the black deep. Livyatan, at somewhere between 13.5 and 17.5 meters, carried those enormous teeth in both jaws, top and bottom, driven by jaw muscles anchored in a skull built like a battering ram. The front of that skull held a deep basin, most likely the same oil-filled organ modern sperm whales use to sense the world around them, and perhaps to strike prey. The researcher who first spotted the fossil, a man from a museum in Rotterdam, had walked that desert for years. The entire skull had been lying just beneath the surface the whole time, a few centimeters of sand between him and the largest teeth on Earth. It did not hunt squid. It hunted other whales, biting chunks out of them the way a killer whale does. Except a killer whale is 8 or 9 meters long and needs a whole pack to bring down large prey, and Livyatan was roughly twice that and could do it alone. 10 million years ago, it cut through the same Peruvian sea as another giant we are about to reach, and the two of them may well have hunted the very same prey. Which brings us, finally, to the two largest animals on this list. One so ancient it barely fits inside the story of life, and one that grew until it rivaled the biggest creature on Earth. The ancient one hides in the mountains of British Columbia, along the remote Sikani Chief River, where ribs and vertebrae the size of tree trunks were found weathering out of a Triassic slope. When they were finally measured and assembled, the animal came to about 21 meters. An ichthyosaur, one of the smooth, dolphin-shaped reptiles that ruled the seas before the dinosaurs had finished taking the land. Its name is Shonisaurus sicanensis, and it is the largest marine reptile science has confirmed. Fragmentary relatives found in Britain, including a single jawbone spotted on a beach that hinted at an animal of similar scale, suggests some may have pushed past 25 meters. 21 meters is the length of a large sperm whale. It is edging toward the length of a blue whale. And now hold on to the thing that sets this one apart from everything else on the list. This animal lived around 205 million years ago. Not during the age of the great dinosaurs. Before it. At the very end of the Triassic, when life on land was still a world of smaller, stranger things, the ocean had already grown a reptile the length of a whale, an air-breathing animal that gave birth to live young out in the open sea, and it was about to erase the whole design. Its close cousins are prized enough that one of them, unearthed in Nevada, was named that state's official fossil. And in the very largest of these ichthyosaurs, the jaws may have held few teeth, or none at all. The giants feeding by suction rather than biting, whale-sized reptiles that fed almost in silence. Drop yourself into that Triassic ocean and you would have shared it with almost nothing else this large. The giant had the water nearly to itself, a whale-shaped shadow moving through an empty sea 100 million years before whales existed. Shonisaurus vanished in the mass extinction that closed the Triassic, and nothing that shape and that size would swim again for a very long time. A creature that enormous, appearing that early and then disappearing, is almost impossible to hold in your head. But there was one hunter that grew larger still, and unlike this silent giant, it did it with teeth. You cannot dig up a Megalodon skeleton. A shark is built of cartilage, not bone, and cartilage dissolves. So when Megalodon died, almost the entire animal simply melted back into the seafloor. What it left behind were teeth. Teeth up to 18 centimeters long, the size of an open hand. So heavy and so finely serrated that for centuries people who found them believed they were the tongues of dragons turned to stone. It took a scholar named Nicolaus Steno in 1667 to recognize them for what they were, the teeth of an impossibly large shark. They turn up on nearly every continent, scattered through old seabeds that have since been lifted into dry hills, because this animal hunted warm oceans right around the planet. Its pups grew up in sheltered coastal nurseries, in the shallows, before moving out into deep water to take on whales. And for a long time, the teeth were all we had. The true size of the animal was a guess built entirely from a mouth. Then, in 2025, a team led by the paleobiologist Kenshu Shimada reconstructed the whole body from the fragments that do survive, comparing it against the full range of living sharks. And the number they reached was up to 24.3 meters. Not built like a bloated great white, they argued, but long and streamlined, closer to a lemon shark in shape, which is part of how it grew so vast. Set that against the great white itself, the terror of every modern ocean, which stops at about 7 meters on its very best day. Megalodon was 3.5 times longer, with a bite powerful enough to crush the ribcage of a whale. It hunted the seas until roughly 3.5 million years ago, and then it was gone. And here is the last measurement, the one this whole list has been walking toward. 24 meters is the size of a blue whale. The largest predator that has ever existed grew to rival the largest animal that has ever existed. And that animal, the blue whale, is not extinct. It is out there right now, at around 30 meters, the one living creature that still beats every monster on this list. But the blue whale has no teeth. It has never hunted anything. It sifts shrimp the size of your fingernail through a mouth big enough to park a car in. So the truth underneath the title is this. The ocean did build hunters larger than anything that hunts today, one after another, for hundreds of millions of years. And the single time it grew something bigger than all of them and let it survive into our world, it made sure that thing was gentle. Almost none of these giants were found on purpose. A turtle turned up in dry badlands, a jaw in a chalk mine, a fish in a clay pit, a skull in a desert, a reptile on a cold riverbank in the mountains, a shark reduced to a scatter of stone teeth. Every one was an accident. Someone in the wrong place, cutting into the wrong rock on the wrong afternoon. And the ocean covers most of this planet, with a floor we have barely mapped and almost never dug into. So the real question is not how big they got, it is how much bigger they got, in all the rock we have never touched, still holding whatever the sea decided to grow when nothing was there to measure it. Quarries cut a little deeper every year, mines break into older and older rock, and thawing ground keeps handing over things nobody expected. And each new find has a quiet habit of being larger than the last. If numbers like these are the kind of thing you want to keep running into, stay with the channel. There are far stranger measurements still buried, and we are only just beginning to pull them out of the ground.